An EWTN News Nightly exclusive.
In a large part of the world, we do have to face the reality of terrorism.
Part 2 of Lauren Ashburn's one-on-one interview with Vatican official Archbishop Paul Gallagher, including what he likes best about working with Pope Francis. War of words. The leader of North Korea reacts to President Trump's tough talk at the UN. We have a report from the White House. More destruction from Maria in the Caribbean as Puerto Rico remains powerless with no end in sight. And spreading peace through art. An exhibit at the Vatican highlights the Catholic Church on the Korean Peninsula. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, September 22nd, 2017. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. As leaders from across the globe discuss the challenges their nations face at the United Nations General Assembly, the Holy See is adding its unique voice. It's helping member countries navigate one of the greatest challenges of our time: how to deal with millions of migrants pouring out of regions racked by war and violence. Tonight we bring you more of Lauren Ashburn's exclusive interview with the Vatican's Secretary for Relations with States, Archbishop Paul Gallagher. He's urging nations to carefully consider their stance on the issue.
I asked the question many times about Catholic teaching on immigration and balancing the right of sovereign nations to defend their borders and the protection and support of the poor. How do you balance that?
You try to balance it. One of the things that the Holy Father is saying is that governments also have a responsibility to estimate or judge their capacity to integrate migrants, in particular, into their society. At the same time, we recognize that this, we've got, 40 million refugees on any one day, and this is without precedent. There's no way you can just say to Greece and to Spain and to Italy, sort it out. Because it's beyond their capacity. They need the solidarity. At the same time, and overcoming that fear that we all have of the unknown, of the different person, the different color, the different culture, the different religion. And this has gone on for centuries and centuries. I'm originally from Irish stock, like millions and millions of Americans. We left because there was a famine in Ireland, and came to Liverpool in the north of England and have never had the good sense to move on. Just like, as the Pope will always say, well, the Bergoglios left Piedmont and went to Buenos Aires. In fact, there are lots of examples in Europe and places where people with goodwill are welcoming people, are integrating them into the society, and it's working well. There are other places where there is rejection, where there's hostility. And then, of course, on top of all of that, in a large part of the world, we do have to face the reality of terrorism, which is a big worry to governments and to peoples, and which we mustn't be overly naive about. We have to understand that that is a concern, and we have to be part of seeking a solution also to that.
The Christian population in Iraq is now about 200,000, according to Archbishop Warda. Was 1.5 million Christians in 2003. The Pope, the US, the UK, all called it genocide. The UN has not. Are you trying to convince the UN to call it a genocide?
No, I don't think we are making that one of our objectives. It's true that many Iraqi Christians have left. Some of them have come to the West, some of them have come to the United States. It's highly unlikely those people will ever want to go home. But there are a lot of Christian refugees in Lebanon and in Jordan. And with the right incentives, these people could, I think, return home. In the play of Nineveh, there's a whole plan now to try and restore Christian villages. At the same time, the Christians do not wish to be put in a museum. They wish to be full members of the societies in which their parents and grandparents have lived for generation upon generation. So we, from the Holy See point of view, we insist very much on citizenship. They have to have citizenship like everybody else and not be just a tolerated minority. Without a Christian presence, which has always been characteristic of the Middle East, particularly of the Holy Land and Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and places like that, then these societies will be probably much more conflictual than without the Christians.
I was in Iraq, I was in Erbil, and many Christians there told me that there isn't enough help, that the UN funding is not going to the Christians, and that is one of the reasons why they're going to places like Australia or to the United States. Is it the Holy See's place to correct that situation?
Well, we can encourage greater generosity from international agencies. It's not that we have the resources to be able to substitute for the sort of funding. But in Iraq, for example, we know that Aid to the Church in Need has this very big project to rebuild Christian villages, and obviously we're encouraging that. So we do what we can.
We've interviewed several people who work very closely with Pope Francis, Cardinal Koch, Cardinal Turks, and we've asked them what it's like working with the Holy Father. What do you like best about it?
The thing I would say that I've always been struck by the Holy Father is his courtesy. He is the most courteous man you could ever meet. If he keeps you waiting for 5 minutes, he will apologize 10 times, despite the fact he's the Pope. At the same time, when you leave, he takes you from the door of his little apartment, and he takes you to the lift, and he presses the button for the lift, and he waits till you disappear in the lift. I've never met anybody quite as courteous as that in my life, and I'm British.
And on that, Archbishop, I think we will end our interview.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. God bless.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you to Lauren for that fascinating interview. We're following a developing story on Capitol Hill where the last-ditch push to repeal and replace Obamacare appears to be dead. Republican Senator John McCain of Arizona says he can't vote for the measure. That means the bill and all its pro-life protections won't have enough support to pass. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un issues a warning to President Trump today, threatening to intensify the international nuclear standoff with a frightening new weapons test. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. We are hearing an unusual direct threat from Kim Jong-un to the President of the United States. And President Trump is not backing down as the war of words continues.
Kim Jong-un is vowing President Trump will pay dearly for his recent threat to destroy North Korea, calling the president mentally deranged and a gangster fond of playing with fire. It's the first time a North Korean leader has issued such a direct statement against the U.S. president. When asked what Kim might do, his foreign minister in New York for the UN General Assembly says North Korea may detonate a hydrogen bomb in the Pacific. President Trump responded in a tweet saying, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, who is obviously a madman who doesn't mind starving or killing his people, will be tested like never before. Kim's statement is in reaction to President Trump's speech earlier this week at the United Nations General Assembly, where he berated North Korea. The president followed up with stiffer new sanctions against the country. North Korea's neighbors, Japan and South Korea, both close U.S. allies, take the threat seriously. So does U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson.
The threat of a nuclear attack remains a grim reality. North Korea may assume that nuclear weapons will ensure the survival of its regime. In truth, nuclear weapons are clearly only leading to greater isolation, ignominy, and deprivation.
Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says the administration's strategy is to apply financial pressure on North Korea, and he's asking for help.
We call on all countries around the world to join us by cutting off all trade and financial ties with North Korea in order to achieve a denuclearized Korean peninsula.
Many Christian leaders say both world leaders could take a cue from the gospel. Some general advice from the Archbishop of Philadelphia, Charles Chaput, may be helpful. He is reminding the faithful this week that everyone has the duty to speak the truth with love. Wyatt.
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting from the White House. Thanks, Mark. The Trump administration's controversial travel ban expires this weekend, and now the administration is looking to replace it. The Wall Street Journal reports a new order will be tailored on a country-by-country basis. The ban is set to go before the Supreme Court over its constitutionality. Two Republican candidates in Alabama for the U.S. Senate are facing off next week in a runoff election. Last night, Luther Strange and Roy Moore debated. Strange is touting support from President Donald Trump.
President of the United States will take time out of his schedule, with all the things going on in the world today, to come to Huntsville tomorrow afternoon and campaign for me.
His attacks have come every day, every hour, every minute throughout, and are carrying on. If you don't believe me, turn on the television.
Strange is the current senator, filling out the term of now Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Moore is the state's controversial former Chief Justice. Hurricane Maria kills at least 6 people in Puerto Rico, and the death toll could rise. The storm, blamed for widespread destruction in the Caribbean, now takes aim at more islands. Wind and rain pummel Turks and Caicos southeast of the Bahamas as Hurricane Maria bears down on the islands. They're just the latest target of the powerful storm. Maria already caused extensive damage across Dominica, wiping out the Caribbean islands' rainforest. The country's prime minister calls it heart-wrenching.
Everybody who I met, the homes were destroyed, completely washed away. You know, there's a lot of human suffering.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is heading to the Caribbean for the second time in a week. He wants to get a first-hand look at the damage in Puerto Rico, which reached out to New York for help. Hurricane Maria cut power to the entire island. It may take weeks, even months, to restore electricity.
We have a lot of flooding. We have reports of, just complete devastation of vulnerable housing.
President Trump has also pledged aid and a visit to Puerto Rico, saying the U.S. territory was absolutely obliterated by Maria. The storm dumped nearly 40 inches of rain on parts of the island in a 24-hour period. The planning director at Ashford Presbyterian Hospital in San Juan says they're doing the best they can to recover.
People get very nervous and anxious. I'm very nervous and anxious too because I had a lot of damage to my apartment. So it's part of what we go through when we have a hurricane. We're used to it. At the same time, it's still it's very stressful.
Catholic Charities USA is collecting money to send to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, just like they did to help the victims of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. The U.S. bishops also announced a special collection this weekend to help the victims of Hurricane Irma. An estimated 421,000 Rohingya, an ethnic minority, have left their homes in Myanmar and traveled to Bangladesh over the past 3 weeks. The UN has counted about 1,400 children who have crossed the border without their parents so far. Child refugees face many dangers, including permanent separation from their families, trafficking, and abuse. The crisis is drawing global condemnation, and pressure is mounting on Myanmar to end what they describe as a systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing. New data unveiled at the United Nations General Assembly shows 152 million children were forced into child labor last year. A Holy See representative at the UN says these new forms of slavery must be abolished, and that starts with a new vision of the human being and our dignity. A Dutch cardinal is calling on the people of the Netherlands to transform the country's society into a culture of life. Cardinal Willem Eijk of the Netherlands is in Rome to meet with the Catholic medical professionals confronting the ethical challenges arising in today's medical community. He underlined the need for doctors of faith to mutually support each other. We are honored to have Cardinal Willem Eijk, Archbishop of Utrecht in the Netherlands, joining us from Rome. Your Eminence, euthanasia was legalized in your country over a decade ago, and even minors may request euthanasia. What is the Catholic Church doing to combat the culture of death?
We, as Dutch Bishops' Conference, we made publicly known the vision of the Church on the respect for human life. Human life is an intrinsic good. We should never violate it, and that is what we told. We also warned during these years for stepping onto the slippery slope. Once you start to violate the intrinsic evil of life, every time you will meet a new situation. And when you accept the termination of life for a certain quantity of suffering, would it not then be allowed, in a situation in which the suffering is a little bit more or less? So when you put the door ajar, it will in the end open totally. That was our fear. The other message of the Dutch bishops was to develop palliative care. Not all medical doctors are aware of the possibilities of medical care, and we said we shall, instead of offering euthanasia and assisted suicide, we should offer professional and tenderly loving palliative care. That was our message.
Well, Your Eminence, we know that the bishops in the Netherlands have been pushing for this issue, but what is the climate among Dutch lay Catholics? Is there a will to fight the euthanasia movement?
We have not many Catholics who are ready to combat the culture of death and to try to transfer it, as John Paul II said, in a culture of life. So we have few adherents to the doctrine of the Church. However, it is very important that we try to help Catholic healthcare workers who are still, ready to fight for the doctrine of the Church. We help them to realize that, to work and to be active as real Catholic healthcare workers.
Well, Your Eminence, we hope that you know that our EWTN viewers will continue to pray for the Catholics in the Netherlands. Cardinal Willem Ayek from the Netherlands, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
It's not often you get to hear from the daughter of a saint, but our team in Rome caught up with Dr. Gianna Emanuela Mola, whose mother, St. Gianna Beretta Mola, refused an abortion while pregnant with her, knowing it would cost her her life. She is carrying on her mother's pro-life legacy.
The gift of life is the most precious, the most sacred, the most important gift. We always have to honor and respect and defend.
Gianna Mola tells us she prays she can live up to her parents' holy example. Her mother became a saint in 2004. Coming up, Father Andre Mahana, a Lebanese native, reacts to President Trump's comments on refugees at the UN. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Lebanon is experiencing the global immigration crisis firsthand. It's hosting more than 1.5 million refugees from Syria and the Palestinian territories. That number could actually be much higher, as many migrants don't register with the United Nations. The country's population is just 4 million. Joining us now is Father Andre Mahana, who is from Byblos, Lebanon originally, and a pastor at St. Rafka Maronite Catholic Church in Colorado. Tell me about, you are advocating for Syrian and Iraqi Christian refugees who are now in Lebanon. What is life like for them right now?
Hopeless. Life for them is hopeless. Life for them is on the streets, human trafficking, organ trafficking. They're selling sometimes their properties at a free rate, really. No social justice. Medically, we have a lot of death rate going on between them from lack of medical attendance, hygiene supplies. So life for them is really losing hope. When I ask their patriarchs and their bishops, they tell me, Father, if you can give them hope, it's even more important for them now than food.
So how are you helping these refugees?
Organizing on monthly basis. We have about, in the beginning we started 250 hygiene supplies, 250 food supplies that we send in portions to 250 families every month. Then we have diapers that we send. Lately, just this month, we signed a new contract that they want us to lower basically till 90 food supplies and 90 hygiene supplies, because they need us more to help with medical expenses for their children. This is in terms of charity. We help here in the United States and the Vatican, all over the world, to raise awareness, and this is where the maximum help is going. Bring their issue up till it becomes the problem of man.
Absolutely, and of course you'll continue to advocate for that. You'll be in Washington again, speaking about saving Christian refugees in the Middle East. What will be your message when you speak?
Americans are very sensitive to the human justice. We have to give it a sense of spiritual destiny. This is what I'll be talking about.
Such an important message. You'll also be headed, you have a busy schedule, be headed to the Vatican in November to talk about the issue of immigration. Tell me a little bit about, you said it's a unique issue. Tell me about what you'll say when you're there.
I'm the president of the Apostolic Union of Clergy and Laity in the United States. We have our 5-year continental meeting. 50 presidents will come. We have an audience with the Holy Father between the 13th and the 17th of November. And my message will be this: American Christians and American Catholics are coming together to care not only for the environment, but also for the oppressed, and to help the Holy Father and somehow see that the persecution that is happening in today's world, it's a faith-related issue. It's not a human crisis only. It's Satan against man.
Father Andre Mahana, the USA President for the Apostolic Union of Clergy, thanks so much for talking with us about it.
Thank you so much.
An exhibit at the Vatican this month celebrates the 230-year history of the Catholic Church on the Korean Peninsula. On Earth as It Is in Heaven is the first ever collaboration between the Vatican Museums and the Archdiocese of Seoul. It highlights the faith of its martyrs and promotes a message of peace. The Catholic faith was originally introduced to Korea through Catholic books brought to the country from Beijing. Up next, Anna Halp of World Youth Alliance tells us about a new sex ed program for children based on the dignity of the human person. And becoming a saint. An Oklahoma priest killed for his faith will be beatified tomorrow. How you can see the special Mass. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. The ACLU and Planned Parenthood file a federal lawsuit challenging a Maine law. The law requires abortions to be performed solely by physicians. It's a restriction common across most of the U.S. The law in Maine dates back to the 1970s. World leaders are wrapping up a big full week of speeches at the United Nations General Assembly. This week, the United Nations Security Council passed a unanimous vote to establish a team to hold accountable crimes committed by ISIS in Iraq. On the sidelines, one organization that monitors the United Nations is working with member nations to implement a new program that teaches children to recognize their human dignity. Joining me now via Skype is Anna Halp, founder and CEO of World Youth Alliance. You may remember I interviewed Anna earlier this week while reporting at the United Nations. Anna, good to have you back on the program. Your organization has launched the Human Dignity Curriculum, a program for children to learn about their sexuality, and it meets the guidelines of the United Nations. What are the core values that your program teaches children?
Thanks, Wyatt. It's great to be back on this conversation with you. The Human Dignity Curriculum is really focused on building a strong base of human anthropology in order to then have the ability to discuss human sexuality. So what does that mean? It means that we really invest in helping the child to understand who am I, and then what does that mean in terms of the choices they make about how they live. So the Human Dignity Curriculum is really focused on building answers that young children know about whether they have human dignity, what that means about human freedom, and how they can make choices to accomplish and achieve human excellence.
How does your program align then with the United Nations declarations on human rights and respect the dignity of the human person?
The curriculum is totally based on the ideas of the dignity of the human person and teaching children how to respect their own and to respect the dignity of others. This, of course, fulfills the preamble to the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. But more importantly, in a sense, for schools and governments, it also meets considerations and guidelines that the WHO and other UN agencies have set up to be guiding standards for the adoption of sexual education. We also know that the latest educational research prioritizes a strong development of personal identity in children, and this curriculum really focuses in doing that. And so we know that if we can really give our children these critical answers to what are, in actual fact, deep philosophical questions, what we're seeing concretely is better outcomes in risk behavior reduction, which translates to less sexual activity, better behavioral attitudes, less experimentation in drugs and other behaviors that really set them back.
Sure, really important values here. The curriculum is still in a pilot program, so what's the next step?
The Human Dignity Curriculum has been released for public use for the grades kindergarten through 8, but the sexual education model that's a sort of lock-in key with that is finalizing its last pilot round with public charter schools in New York State. That will be released in 2018. And following that, we'll be releasing both the anthropological content for grades 9 to 12, as well as the sexual education component for those grades.
Well, it sounds fascinating, and we wish you guys the best of luck with implementing and promoting that curriculum. Anna Halp, founder and CEO of World Youth Alliance, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks very much.
An Oklahoma-born priest killed in Guatemala because of his faith will become blessed tomorrow. The beatification Mass for Father Stanley Rother will take place in Oklahoma City. EWTN will be streaming the Mass tomorrow, live starting at 11 a.m. Eastern. EWTN News Nightly will also be streaming the event on our Facebook page. A documentary about Father Rother's life will air tonight at 8. Beatification is the last step before being declared a saint. Finally, tonight, Pope Francis makes a surprise visit to people with disabilities. The St. Lucy Foundation cares for people of all ages with multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, and other conditions. The Pope is known to make surprise visits on Fridays. I'm sure they were very happy, excited to see him. Well, we thank you for joining us this week. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.